Cities are getting hotter worldwide, but can we do something to combat this urban overheating problem? And what is it like to implement and create widespread impact of research that you have spent decades perfecting? With a laundry list of grand challenges, we are all called upon each and every day to think of out-of-the-box ways to make our world a more sustainable place. This show is about inspiring individuals and their journey along the cutting edges of science, engineering, technology, and design. I'm your host, Peter Marcus-Bach, and this is the Grand Challenges Podcast. My guest today is Mattheos Santamouris, the Anita Lawrence Professor of High Performance Architecture at the University of New South Wales in Sydney, Australia. Mattheos' incredible global career to date has seen him take on the challenges of making our cities cooler, more livable, and adaptable to climate change, both through research and implementation in over 200 projects across the world. Today's show is an eye-opening discussion on the serious consequences our cities are facing due to climate change and urgent and key actions that must be taken if we are to safeguard our world's future. For more information, refer to the show notes over at peterandbach.com/podcast. Thank you for joining, and please enjoy the show. Mattheos, it's a pleasure to be with you and have this chance to sit down and learn a lot more about you.
Thank you so much for the invitation. It's my pleasure.
And I guess I can call you Matt. Many people call you Matt.
Of course you can call me Matt.
Yeah.
Everyone is calling me Matt.
Yeah, that's lovely. Mattheos is Greek origin, the Greek name?
Yes. Mattheos, Matthew, Matthias, it's the same name.
Yeah, and actually, I've been, since 2010, trying to plan a trip to Greece. It's never really materialized, I guess, because at the time I was in Australia. But now that I'm in Europe, I know probably this year is going to be the time I go. Any tips for traveling to Greece?
Oh, yes. It depends what you want really to see and what you want to do in Greece. Greece is a very nice country. Like most of the Mediterranean countries, you can enjoy your stay, you have good food, you have good people, you have good places. So you may enjoy it. If you like to have, nightlife, you have to go to, let's say, Mykonos or Paros or this kind of islands. If you like a little bit more calm, islands, you can find, some small islands with fresh fish and nice beaches, so you can enjoy. Greece is a very nice country for holidays. Very calm country and in a way, polite country. You can really feel well there.
No, that's lovely. And I've been looking at some of the islands, getting some recommendations as well as to which ones I should go to.
Of course.
Yeah.
My preferred island, is Santorini by far. I used to have a house there, but now I'm in Australia, and because it was almost impossible to visit the house, we sold it. Santorini is a very nice place. It's a gastronomic capital of Greece, in my opinion. You can have some excellent restaurants, very good quality, very nice places, you will enjoy. But there are many other islands that I prefer. For example, the island of Sifnos, which has excellent quality of life and also very good food. For me, food is very important, given my French background. Yeah, and it's a small, nice island. Unfortunately, you have to go by boat there. No flights, no airport. Milos is also a very nice place. If you like to go to a bigger island, you have to go to Crete. Huge opportunities. Very nice. Really very nice place. My mother was originated from Crete and I like Crete very much. But, whatever you're doing during summer in Greece, you will enjoy it.
No, lovely. And I'll definitely take those recommendations to heart and let you know where I end up going once I finally get onto that plane and the boat as well. But I guess it really reflects also the kind of person you are. You've traveled quite a lot. Actually, just now before this recording, you mentioned you felt you might have been a bird in your previous life.
Yes, I like very much traveling, And I think that I can renew my mind, by traveling. Not because I'm changing, the environment around me, but because, I'm coming into contact with other people, sometimes with other civilization. I can see new things. So I feel really that is a refreshing approach for me. It's a very refreshing approach. So I like it very much. I have to tell you that when I was in Greece, and I used to travel a lot, especially for European projects, there was a period that I had more than 2 or 3 trips per month,
Oh, wow.
Spending almost half of my time, abroad. During the summer, because we don't have any meetings, holidays, I remember that when I returned back, my first trip in September, October, traveling, and I went to the airport, I said, this is the place I like, Airport is my house, it's my home.
Wow. And you've also been visiting professors in a number of different cities, Seoul, for example, in Tokyo, Singapore, Malaysia even, and in London as well. And you've had a chance to also feel the culture as a person living there at the time. And this, I think for someone in the field that you're in, which is really around city making, urban climates, really mitigating the changes to climate change, particularly around urban heat and comfort, or bioclimatic architecture, as they call it. This experience, I think, really gives you that holistic view of how different situations call for different solutions.
Yeah, there are two issues here. The scientific issue, what we learn, working in different environments, and also what we, let's say, learn and how we shape our character through the collaboration with other people and coming to contact with other cultures. So I feel very lucky because I had the opportunity to travel around the world. I have visited about 65 countries.
Wow.
And I'm really very happy and I feel blessed because I came to contact with very serious people, very different people. I learned a lot. I learned to respect the others. I understood that the principles and perhaps the ideas we have around us living in our city, in our countries, perhaps are not the best and perhaps not the unique ideas you have really to follow. Many other people, many other places present other ideas, present other principles that you have to learn and you have to think and you have to absorb and you have to digest. And if possible, you have to integrate into your life and your character. So this is what you call holistic approach. Yes, we learn coming to contact with the others and we improve our character. Of course, if we are interested to improve our character. But as it concerns the scientific, let's say, part, for sure, working in different environments, you learn a lot. You learn a lot because you never had the experience, So you have to invent and to understand new conditions. For example, working in Saudi Arabia now, preparing the mitigation, let's say, plan for Riyadh, it was something completely new for me because we had to work in a desert city. And I never had this experience before. So the, let's say, solutions that were used to apply, in European cities like in Athens, for example, or in Rome or in Barcelona, etc., have nothing to do with the solutions really we have to, let's say, implement in a desert city. So you have to think a lot, you have to learn a lot, you have to experiment a lot, you have really to discuss with the local people and understand their knowledge. You have to digest all this knowledge and then you have to be very humble and try really to approach local things and apply the best technologies.
I can certainly relate to that because I've faced the same challenges when I've had to transfer my research moving from Australia to Europe as well.
A direct transfer of, let's say, technology in other places, and especially on climatic issues, is a suicide. It's really a big mistake. It's a big mistake. No. Unfortunately, it happens many times. Many people, they have a technology and they like to apply and implement it everywhere. It's a very big mistake. We need to have appropriate technologies that fit to the specific conditions. It's a medical approach. First, we scan, we understand the problems, and then we try really to identify and offer the best medicines.
Definitely.
We don't offer medicines from the very beginning without understanding the problem.
And so this is, I think, where we have a good opportunity to take a step back for our listeners to illustrate this problem. Because maybe many people listening to this show will have felt it, but I think it's probably good to get a bit of an overview. So the world, climate change, world is getting warmer. I think we have global shifts in the water cycle. And we already know that urbanization replaces a lot of natural materials. It's disrupting the natural cooling that our urban environments would normally have. And so what you end up getting is increased daytime temperatures. This temperature doesn't get any better during the night because of these materials releasing the heat. And as a result, it takes ages, maybe even past midnight, before you start to feel that reprieve and feeling a bit more comfortable in the environment. But what are really the implications of this in the long term?
Yeah, that's, urbanization is extremely important during the last, let's say, 100 years. We expect that, let's say, by 2050, about 65% of the population in all over the world will live in cities. In Europe, for example, may be higher than 80%. So, the urbanization is the real climatic history of our last 100 years. So we learn through urbanization, and we try really first to understand the problems we have. Now we have a very good knowledge, I think, during the last 30 years. There is a very serious research carried out all around the world trying to identify the main climatic problems of cities. But these climatic problems are not disconnected from the social, the economic problems, from the overall life of cities. It's not a marginal problem. It's part, of the global game that happens in cities. And climatic change or local climatic change has to be, let's say, seen as part of the global evolution of cities. So in the future, we expect, according to the predictions and the forecast, that the size of cities may increase up to 60 or 70%, even 75%. So a lot of suburban or rural areas will be changed, their land use, and will be urban areas.
Much denser than we have now.
Much more spaces, and mainly in Southeast Asia, in Africa, in the Gulf area, in South America, not so much in Europe or in the United States. But, given this tremendous increase of the urbanization, we expect very serious problems that we have to solve, not in the future, but we have to solve today.
We anticipate them, so we have to be proactive rather than reactive. So tell me a bit about these problems.
Which are these problems? First, there is, an important, serious lack of housing in our days. About 1 billion people is living in slums. And it is expected, or foreseen, if you like, by 2050, about 2 billion people will live in slums. So we have to build million of new square or billion square meters of new housing. This means that we have really to follow very specific patterns on the way we build these houses to face the local and the global climatic change. If really we wish to decarbonize the built environment by 2050, first, we need really to decrease the use of carbon in the existing houses and commercial buildings, but at the same time, we have to build all the new buildings using zero carbon technologies. This is a serious problem for several reasons. First, there is a serious problem of lack of technology and lack of resources, especially in the third world.
That is very true.
You have to understand that, construction is really so important that we build a new Paris per week.
Wait, as in the city Paris?
Yes, we built a new Paris per week.
Oh, wow. Okay.
This is really the rate of construction. And because of the lack of resources and perhaps the lack of knowledge and technology, most of the new constructions are built using traditional, highly carbon technologies. And these buildings will be operational for the next at least 50 years. So this creates a serious problem, especially in the developing countries. And it makes almost impossible the objective and the target for 1.5 degrees temperature increase by 2050. So we have to find proper ways to design and build low income, in general, buildings that do not present a very high carbon value and at the same time do not compromise the quality of life in the urban spaces. It is expected that because of the increase of the size of our cities, the overheating of our cities may increase up to 1, 2, or even 3 degrees. This is the local climatic change.
And with that, serious consequences as
Absolutely.
well for our well-being.
If we consider also on top of it the increase of the temperature because of the global climatic change, we may expect that in specific parts of the world, especially in these mega cities, we may have an increase of the temperature by 2050 up to 4 or 5 degrees. This, of course, will deteriorate the quality of life. We may have temperatures up to 50 degrees, especially in India.
Oh, wow.
Recent studies shown that the capacity of outdoor workers will decrease up to 70%, and this will have a tremendous impact on the GDP. Recent studies also show that in these areas there will be a decrease of the GDP by 30% by 2050 because of the overheating. On the other hand, we will have a tremendous increase of the energy consumption for cooling because higher temperatures, non-appropriate quality of buildings ask for air conditioning. And air conditioning is cheap to be installed, but very expensive to run it. It asks for infrastructure, energy infrastructure, new power plants that operates mainly during the peak period and do not operate for the rest of the period. And this increases tremendously the cost of electricity. Just to understand that a recent study showed that just one Indian city, Mumbai, by 2050 may present higher energy consumption for cooling than the whole United States.
Now that puts things into perspective.
Yeah. And you understand that by having such an energy consumption, it means that they have to install a very high number of new power plants. And there are serious questions which kind of power plants, which cost of these power plants, which kind of fuel, and who's going to pay for it.
True.
So in reality, the urbanization will create serious problems of quality of life, serious energy problems, but also will create important health problems, because we know very well that physiological adaptation to high temperature may happen, but not up to 5 degrees. It's impossible. At the same time, the only way really to face the problem of overheating is to be in a protected space, which means air conditioning. Perhaps this is possible for those that can afford it, but those that cannot afford it, I'm afraid that the cost and the cost of lives will be very serious. So if really we don't have alternative solutions for the low-income people in these mega cities, I'm afraid that we will sacrifice some hundreds of thousands or even millions of people in the future.
I'm just going to let that sink in a little. That sounds pretty insane and pretty serious.
This is a very serious problem. Mental health is going to be a serious problem in the future. All the forecasts show that the cost of mental health by 2050 will be about 6 to 7 times higher than today. We know that during the overheating period, mental health is a serious problem, and the problems of mental health really are increasing tremendously during the period of high temperatures in our days. So the problem of additional heat-related mortality and morbidity and mental health will be a very serious problem. There are several forecasts about the number of premature deaths, etc., but it's not important really to believe or not believe a number. For sure, if we don't really adapt the local population or we don't really prepare in a proper way the new cities, we will have tremendous casualties. And this is what really we have to consider. And on the other hand, apart of the problem of health, the problem of energy, we may have very serious environmental problems, and especially pollution problems. We already have very serious pollution problems. But because of the higher temperatures and the use of conventional technologies and conventional fuels, we may have a tremendous increase of the so-called ground level ozone, which is a killer.
Yeah.
And all the predictions for the future shows a very high increase of the ground level ozone that really is toxic and may kill hundreds of thousands of people. Is already killing a lot of people, may kill thousands of people. So in conclusion, if we don't adapt our cities, and especially the part of the cities where low-income people is living, I'm afraid that we have decided to sacrifice some million of low-income households and people. This is the reality.
It's a very bleak outlook. I'm lost for words. But there are technological solutions, right?
The problem is not only technological. It's not only, to find the technology. I think that the technology exists. The real problem is a financial and economic problem. Actually, according to, let's say, all forecasts and predictions, we have to spend about 1.6 trillion per year in order to decarbonize the built environment by 2050, all around the world. 1.6 trillion.
Not a small amount at all.
This amount of money is not available, by the states, by the countries. Just to understand that in Europe, we needed to spend about 260 billion per year for the built environment. And the European Union or the states, they contribute no more than 100, 150. So the rest has to come from the market. The rest has to come from the financial institutions. So the main question now is how really to convince the market and the financial institutions to enter into this green business and finance in a proper way the future or the green future of the humanity. For the time being, there are a lot of efforts, but not very successful. Not very successful. So in my opinion, the major challenge is really to find the proper tools to modify the economic system and the financial system in order really the financial sector and then the private sector put the priority, on green investments and put the priority on issues that have to do with the so-called ESG.
So just to clarify for the listeners, that's environmental, social, and governance investing.
Actually, in Europe, there are a lot of efforts to try to do that. With the Inflation Act in the United States, also they try to do that. But this is not the case in, let's say, the rest of the world.
Yeah.
And Europe and the United States perhaps are the big polluters, but compared, to the size of the population in the rest of the world, it's nothing.
It's nothing, no.
Given now the plans for the future of China, that they have increased in a very high percentage the share of coal power plants. They have announced that they will build many new coal power plants, the same in India. And what really it happens in Africa, where mainly China is building everywhere coal plants. In reality, we don't see any, let's say, positive future for these areas. And the problem will start from there. The problem will be there, given that more than 60-70% of the global population will live there. So in reality, although there are serious efforts, mainly in Europe, Europe is trying hard. Perhaps it's not really very efficient, but it's trying hard. And now in the United States, for the rest of the world, we don't have really the proper plan to face the problem. And I think that we are moving full speed towards the wall. And I'm not sure if really the scenario will be, or what will happen, will be an increase of the temperature by 2.5 degrees with all the impact and the consequences that we just mentioned. But I'm afraid that before that, we will have a serious shock.
Yeah.
And given that we don't have the experience of the dynamic behavior of the atmosphere and of the nature to the increase of the temperature, we cannot predict what will happen. So I'm afraid that in the near future, we will have a serious shock. Yeah. A shock that may, let's say, cost thousands of millions of people all around the world.
That's a very grim outlook, and we don't really have that much time to act.
I cannot describe this type of shock that will happen, but I'm afraid that this will happen.
And we might face it.
Yeah.
It actually reminds me of a novel I read recently and finished. It's called The Ministry for the Future by Kim Stanley Robinson. And the book opens with exactly one of these kinds of potential consequences you describe, which is a severe heat wave in India, which absolutely obliterates a lot of the population. And okay, it's not as extreme in the book, but in a way, it really paints that hypothetical future if we're not acting. And that we need to act urgently.
I think that in reality, we have developed a lot of scenarios. We have the agreements, that most of the countries do not follow. We know the pathways, and we have many pathways. And we have a full knowledge of what will happen in our future without taking into account the surprises that may happen.
So the so-called black swan events or the unknown unknowns or the wildcard events that we just simply cannot predict because we have no clue.
So, given that we know now,
yeah.
And given that, as I said before, we need 1.6 trillion per year for the built environment, and given that we don't have this money, and given that the developed countries, although they have promised at least to give 100 billion per year to the developing countries, and they offer no more than 10, 20, it's the maximum. These 10, 20 billions, let's say, compared to 1 trillion or 1.2 trillions that have to be spent in the third world, is peanuts. It's nothing. I think that in reality we have agreed in a silent way that we will sacrifice these people.
Which is terrible.
Yeah, we will sacrifice these people. And these people will not be adopted. Climatic change will not be mitigated there, or we may expect in these areas an important increase of the temperature, completely new phenomena, social problems, health problems, energy problems. And those they believe that, this will not affect and will not impact Europe or United States, they are very wrong.
For anyone aware about how interconnected our world is, there's certainly knock-on effects to be expected.
Because there's a tremendous stratification, and this stratification will bring the problem to Europe, and the United States and the developed countries. So this is what is happening now. I think that it is very clear that we cannot really face the problem of the third world. The poor countries of the third world, they are not able to act or to design any policy of decarbonization because they don't have really the resources. Countries, they have the resources, they don't follow this path for different reasons. India is trying a bit, but they don't have also the resources. So I'm afraid that these countries, especially Southeastern Asia, will be a living lab of climatic change, global and local climatic change. And who knows what will happen there. But I think that, and this is something that has to be very well understood, that our leaders all around the world, they have well understood the problem. And in my opinion, they have agreed in a silent way that they will sacrifice these people.
This is a serious and eye-opening reality check that you have definitely offered, and a picture that we need to just let sink in. But in a way, doom and gloom, we still have means. I guess we've advanced the science and our understanding of how we could help design the cities to be more resilient, to try and address it. I guess the key is the funding aspect. But I feel this is a good way to also get into your own work and a lot of what you've accomplished as well. And so you're in what you call high-performance architecture. I find that a very cool way of describing architecture because I've had some architects on the show before, and I feel it's a very important aspect to make some first impact into urban design. But what would you define as high-performance architecture?
During the last 30, 40 years, climatic responsive architecture, or the way we design and we build, especially in our cities, has very much improved and has taken into account all the climatic issues. This is very important. And we have a tremendous progress as it concerns the new design tools, the new materials we have, the new ideas. So we can and we are able now, and we have done it thousands of times, to build zero energy buildings in the equator. Consider now that in Singapore, a very warm environment, we have zero energy buildings, or in the desert, we may have zero energy buildings. So the scientific progress that has been achieved in the building sector allows us to be very optimistic regarding the technological potential for the future or for our days.
Let's just define zero energy building. So it's a building that does not
need any energy.
Any energy at all. But Absolutely. It could also be through a balance.
Or positive energy buildings and positive energy settlements. We have all this. So we have the technology. This is more than sure. So the main question is why this technology is not applied, is not implemented for different reasons.
And this is also part of the research and advocacy you engage in, aside from just purely technological development. So what are the key challenges here?
First, because countries, the states, they do not ask for it. In Europe, they try to do it. And with the new European Bauhaus and with the new European directives, and also in a way in the United States, we may have an important decarbonization of the building stock by 2050. This will have a tremendous cost for the population. And the main question is who is going to pay for it. The second question for the developed countries is that although we have the resources to perform all the necessary investments for the decarbonization, how this will return to the population, for example, if really we spend 5-6 trillions per year for the decarbonization of the power sector, the investments have to be in a way returned back. So who is going to pay for it? So there is a risk if really we don't follow properly policies that by 2050 we may have in Europe or in the United States decarbonized or almost decarbonized built environment with a tremendous cost of the electricity and of the energy. So, for example, today, in average, a European household is paying about 11 to 12% of their income for energy. If, for example, in 2050, living in a decarbonized environment with about 80% less energy consumption, they pay 20% of their income for energy, this is not something that we have very much to appreciate.
No, definitely not.
So the real issue is not only to decarbonize. The issue is to decarbonize and have an added value and have benefits for the people. So all those that they just put the emphasis on the environmental issues, neglecting the social and the financial and the economic issues, I have to say that they are very wrong. These things go together.
Classical sustainability principles, where indeed you have to look at all three lenses.
We can decarbonize, but the cost, if we don't take the proper actions, will be tremendous for the low income and also for the average income people. So this is something to be considered. And we've seen that during the recent energy crisis, for example, in Europe.
Yeah.
The price has increased tremendously. And even the price of renewables, that in reality the price was not so high. So the market may, let's say, be regulated in such a way that the benefits of decarbonization in reality results in benefits of some very big investors and some, let's say, big companies, which in reality are the same like the oil and coal companies of today, and on the detriment of the population, especially the low-income population. So in conclusion, it's good to decarbonize, and we have to decarbonize out of discussion, but especially in the developed countries, the financial issues and the social issues have to be taken into account, and this is not the case today.
No.
This is not the case at all. This is something that we neglect, trying really to put the emphasis just on the technological issues. In the developing countries, these issues are extremely important, and unfortunately, the lack of resources in these countries, and at the same time, the lack of the necessary financial institutions and financial tools makes things very difficult, extremely difficult.
No doubt.
So given the tremendous needs for new housing and for new buildings, the tremendous increase of the population in these areas, and the very important requirement to improve the quality of life of these people, together with, the climatic change, I'm afraid that we are moving very fast to a future where we will need very high energy consumption to, in a way, face the problem, if it is possible, serious health problems, extremely serious environmental problem, and very serious poverty problems for these areas. So this is what really is happening. And United Nations, they mention every day that this is going to be happening. IPCC,
the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change,
they refer to this. The scientific world produces a lot of information about it. Technological developments allow us to solve the problem, but we don't have the tools and the necessary financial modifications in order to face the problem. Technology is here, technology is available. For example, in my team, we have developed technologies for cities, the so-called super cool materials, that under the sun, when temperature was, let's say, 40 degrees, during the summer, these materials present a surface temperature of 23 degrees, 15 to 17 degrees below the ambient temperature.
Wow.
And these materials may decrease the temperature of cities up to 4 or 5 degrees immediately. So technology is here. And we have a lot of implementation of these technologies, more than 250 large-scale implementations all around the world, that shows really that it is possible to decrease the temperature of cities up to 4 or 5 degrees, together with other technologies like increased green infrastructure, materials, water, blue technologies, and things like that.
The green and blue infrastructure certainly being something I am deeply involved in and hoping to continue to operationalize and support the cooling of our cities.
And in the future, we will have more opportunities. So we know really how to decarbonize the buildings and how to, let's say, mitigate local and global climate change in the cities of the world. And we have some very good examples from developed countries. We don't have good examples from developing countries. This is the main problem.
And this is where we still have to go.
The real, let's say, increase of the size of the mega cities or the cities is in the developing countries. And there, really, we don't have the implementation of the solutions. I'm not saying we don't have the solutions. We have the solutions, but we don't have the implementation. Because these implementations ask for very deep and profound modifications of the financial, economic, and social policies followed in these countries.
And so what's interesting, I guess, about you in particular is that you actually began your journey in physics. You did your studies in physics, your PhD in physics at the University of Patra, and then later on in Athens. So what made you decide to go in this direction? I guess physics is always that theoretical and the more applied areas as well.
Yeah, this is a question that I have asked myself several times, In reality, I studied physics. I have a PhD in physics, and I'm professor of high-performance architecture. And many times I'm wondering if this is a success or a failure. But in reality, there are no boundaries between sciences. There are no boundaries. And everything is physics.
True.
In reality, everything is physics. Building physics is very important and has to do with the quality of life of everyone, because we spend 80% of our time in buildings. We're living in cities. And we are facing so many phenomena. We have problems of energy. We have problems of pollution. We have problems of indoor air quality. We have problems having to do with the outdoor environment and the overheating, climatic change. All these phenomena are phenomena of physics.
Very true.
And someone, some scientists, some disciplines, they have really to work on it. So I was attracted very much by this kind of phenomena. And many times in our life, there are some happenings that really reorient your work. After my studies in the University of Patras, as you said, I went to France and I studied energy physics. And I was very much attracted by solar energy and renewable energy sources in general and energy efficiency. So this was a natural, let's say, temptation that I had. And this was my scientific preference. And I started working on it when I returned back in Greece, then with the European Union. And then when we had the very first implementations, and we have seen that we were successful, we were very much encouraged. And gradually, we developed new technologies, new materials, new ideas, new knowledge that fortunately were implemented and in a way successfully. So gradually we increased our confidence to our work. And gradually we understood that it is possible to contribute really successfully towards a more green and sustainable world. And having the experience and the knowledge, you can set priorities and you can really understand what is important and what is less important. In my opinion, the problem of environmental quality of the built environment, including energy problems, is one of the most important problems we are facing in the world. And this has tremendous social impacts. Don't forget that actually, according to the European Parliament, there are more than 50 million energy poor in Europe. In reality, according to the Observatory of Energy Poverty in Europe, the number is much higher, more than 100 million people. These people cannot afford to pay for heating and cooling. They are living under unbelievable conditions. For example, the monitoring of a very high number, thousands of buildings all around Europe, of low-income housing, show that people during the winter period, they are living in temperatures close to 5, 6, 7 degrees. Don't forget that some years ago, we had 50,000 deaths because of the cold homes in the UK. Now it's about 25,000. Or during the summer, low-income people, especially in the south, but also in the UK, they live under, let's say, 40 degrees or more than 20 consecutive days above 35 degrees. This has a tremendous impact on their quality of life and also on health.
That is true. There is only so long you can survive several days of heat in a row without proper cooling. I, for one, wouldn't be able to stand it.
Don't forget that during the heat waves, and especially the important heat waves at the beginning of the 20th century, in Europe, where we had more than 150 or 200,000 deaths all around Europe, most of the people that they passed away were low-income people. This is very well known. On the other hand, when people is not really possible to afford the energy cost, they suffer. But the role and, let's say, the requirements for the scientific community is to try to solve the problem or find solutions for them. Many people, they say that this is a problem that happens, for example, in less developed countries. Not at all. For example, in Australia, when I joined Australia 7 years ago, and I started asking about energy poverty, no one responded on it, saying that there is no energy poverty in Australia. 4 years ago, together with the local government that they financed such a study, we monitor about 100 low-income houses in Western Sydney. You may not believe it. During the winter period, indoor temperatures was as low as 5, 6, 7 degrees.
Oh, jeez.
And during the summer period, not during a heat wave, indoor temperature was as high as 40 degrees.
Inside. And this is not during a heat wave?
Not during a heat wave.
Wow. I tend to overheat very easily, so it's hard for me to even imagine what it would be like in a heat wave then.
So you understand that these people really suffers. And of course, they have very serious health problems and mental health problems. according to a recent study, schizophrenia in the global population is low, below 1% of the global population.
Yeah.
In very low-income people, it is close to 11%.
Jeez.
It's a serious problem. Why I'm saying all this? I'm saying that the environmental and energy problems in the built environment are very much associated with social and financial problems.
Coming back to the points that you were making earlier, the classical lenses of sustainability.
So it has to go together. It's an integrated approach.
No doubt. And so that has been really one of the big focal points of a lot of the research that you've done, which is the design of these more energy efficient buildings and cooler buildings. And I guess going together with that is also the use of strategies like cool materials or even green infrastructures like green roofs to pad and insulate these buildings.
Absolutely. Trying really to develop solutions in order really to eradicate the problem of energy poverty, or in a way, let's say, help low-income population. You may have some ideas, and together with industry, you may, let's say, develop some products, like cool materials, as you said, and many other products. This is not the difficult part of our work. We can do that. The more difficult part is when we implement this.
True.
And I had really the chance, and I was very lucky, to implement the solutions that we have designed really in large-scale rehabilitation projects all around the world. And you may not believe me, there is a tremendous satisfaction when you see how people is responding really to this. Using European capitals and funds, we have rehabilitated a very high number of low-income houses all around Europe. And people that they used to live under unbelievable conditions, really, they improve tremendously their quality of life. This is something, of course, that gives you a certain satisfaction. But when you visit them and when you discuss with them, you are leaving the house and you're so happy and so flattered that you say that, okay, this was really extremely important. So I think that the human dimension of our work is more important than the scientific dimension or the academic dimension or whatever. So if our research is not very much linked, connected with the real needs of the society, I'm afraid that we are working without really having any impact. So it is very important to link our research, whatever we are doing, with the real needs, and especially with the needs of those that they are suffering in our society.
And to really understand the local context, because as you said, if you're trying to just apply a solution as is to anywhere, it's essentially suicide. It's a recipe for disaster.
Absolutely, yeah. This is the most important. To see that the results of your research really has a real impact. And this do not really, at the end, contributes to increase the profits of some multinational and international companies. I have nothing against the multinational and international companies, but the main objective of our work is not really to improve the benefits of the big companies, is to improve the quality of life of people. If this happens through multinational and international companies, this has to happen by following some principles,
Yeah.
And researchers and scientists, they have to follow moral principles. This is, in my opinion, very important. And it is what is driving really our research.
Yeah, and maybe we can go through some of these principles as a rule of thumb for those to take away as well.
Yeah, this is really what's defined the perspectives, of our plans for the future, if we have plans for the future, and what really drives our philosophy for the scientific work. Without, let's say, a certain philosophy about the objectives of our scientific work, I'm afraid that we became, small toys in the hands of those that they manipulate the research. We may contribute in developing several things, but in reality, we cannot control the result of our research. And for me, at least, without really to be arrogant at all, I like to control the impact of my research.
Yeah, I feel when you're in control, you can really steer it towards the real outcome that you want to see. I don't think it's arrogant at all. I think there's a certain truth to it because you're allowing yourself to really be independent and to do the work independently, knowing your values and your objectives.
In reality, we are not independent.
In reality.
No one is independent.
No.
We depend very much on the financing institutions. We
Funding
depend
bodies,
very much on governments. We depend very much on the society. But we have our priorities, we have our objectives, we have our principles, and it is a continuous fight in order really to find the best consensus.
Yeah.
It has to be a win-win for everyone. We should not be just pawns in the hands of those that they want our results. We should really work for the benefit of the society. I hate, to see people working for, let's say, the tobacco industry, presenting research that shows that tobacco, for example, is not so harmful for people. This is something that scientists should avoid to do it. I hate to see researchers trying really to convince that there is no climatic change, except if they believe it and they can fight for it. So I hate to see people that they try really to convince us that the material is very good because they are paid by an industry. And this is not the case. So I think that we have to be as much as possible independent. And we have really to compromise between our principles, very important, and the liberty that is offered to us by, let's say, the whole system.
And I guess, especially in our situation with urbanization, with trying to make cities more livable, be it at a building or a neighborhood scale, I think the need to bring in multiple industry partners, multiple funding sources, I think may provide that.
Absolutely. As I mentioned before, we miss really resources.
Yep.
And we have to mobilize the private sector and the financial institutions.
Yep.
Without the help of the private sector and without the help of the market and without the help of the financial institution, we cannot really proceed. It's out of discussion. So we need to have a green market. And this is possible. This is not an utopia. I think that is a win-win, really, situation for the market if they follow really green principles and they invest on green products. Recent studies have shown that companies that they have real investments in green developments, they have higher profits than companies that they invest on conventional solutions.
Okay.
This is very clear.
So there's a business case emerging.
Yeah, this is very clear. And on the other hand, the market has to understand that they play a very important role regarding our future. By financing, for example, the big banks, the financial sector, the oil and coal companies, unfortunately, they contribute towards a black future for our society. On the contrary, if they finance renewable energy sources and clean technologies, well, they may have the same benefits, they may have the same profits, but on the other hand, they really contribute towards a more green future for our kids. So this is something, of course, that looks to be a little bit as a more, let's say, option, but in reality, it fits very well with the financial and economic, let's say, priorities of the financial sector. And at the same time, really, it satisfies completely the ways that they operate. The same in the market. Why, for example, a company has to promote technologies which increase the temperature in cities? Why not to promote solutions that they have less environmental cost for the cities? I will give you an example.
Okay, sure.
When we started really developing the so-called cool materials for cities, it was a serious problem to find an industry that they will produce these materials for us. All these companies, they used to produce concrete pavements, the conventional concrete pavements that you see everywhere, or asphalt, etc. So we approach really companies, asking them to develop these products. We give them all the knowledge, all the recipes, and they came with solutions and cost 4 to 5 times higher than the conventional techniques and technologies. This was a disaster.
Oh, no.
So we had to fight a lot with the market and try to find really the healthy producers that they wanted really to invest in it. We found some of them. They done it. As a result, the whole industry understood 1, 2, 3 years later that there is a tremendous market in these new green technologies, and they started investing. Now, these green materials for cities, for example, the cool pavements, cost exactly the same like the conventional technologies. So why we have to use conventional technologies and not the green technologies? So I think that for the market, a policy towards green investments and by respecting ESG principles may have tremendous benefits for them. Of course, I think that the states and the countries, they have to intervene and help really towards this direction. Marketing is a very important issue here. And unfortunately, because all the companies, they have understood that green marketing is something very beneficial for them, we have this terrible greenwashing.
Yes, greenwashing. We've actually mentioned that term before on a previous episode 3, with Dr. Martin Koller, who also offered some very interesting examples of it. There is a danger in greenwashing, actually, yes.
Not to forget that recently the European Union has rejected about 75% of the so-called green ESG initiatives of the 100 biggest companies in Europe. they have rejected as greenwashing. And now there is the new European directive on greenwashing. So green marketing is something which is developed during the very last years. A lot of money has been circulated around it without really contributing to a real green development. But gradually we have understood, gradually the states that have intervened, and I hope that the serious companies really they wish to invest in a proper way towards green development. So in conclusion, the market really has a lot of incentives and a lot of benefits if they intervene and if they invest on green technologies. The same for the financial sector. We need to have a transition period. Cannot be happen, from one day to the other. Because of the mentality of people, because of the investments that exist. For example, a huge, capital having to do with the pension of people is invested in bonds of conventional oil and coal companies.
Yep.
So we cannot really damage these investments because millions of people will lose their pensions. This has to happen,
gradually
during the transition period. But it's very important to understand this, and it's very important that the CEOs of the big companies, of the financial sector, they invest towards this direction. It happens. Every year we have a tremendous increase of the green investments.
That's a hopeful sign.
We have a very important increase. Unfortunately, this is not enough.
No.
According to a very recent study, the investments that we are doing now on green development have to be increased by a factor of 14.
14.
14, in order really to achieve this famous decarbonization or zero carbon, by 2050.
Yeah.
This cannot happen immediately, but let's move towards this direction. So these are the positive news that gradually we're moving towards that, but this is not enough.
No, definitely
because unfortunately we started quite late. Unfortunately, we don't have enough time. The window is closing. The new IPCC report published shows that the window is very small anymore. So if we want to have this 1.5 degrees, we have to do much more. It seems that this is not possible. It seems that the world leaders, they don't like to invest, or they don't have to invest, or they don't have the resources to invest. For example, in Europe, actually 30% of the total budget of the European Union goes to environment.
Okay.
If really we invest more in environment, this means that these resources has to be taken by health, by education, any other.
But I guess this is where we can also start to form better arguments for all the multiple benefits that these kinds of solutions can bring.
Yeah. But it's a compromise, So it seems that the developed countries, they have decided not really to invest more. So if really we wish to save the third world, we do not really have to count on these 50, 20, 100 billions per year by the developed countries. We have to count on the market.
Yep.
We have to count on the financial sector. So if we mobilize the market in the developing countries and the financial sector in the developing countries, they can save these countries.
Yep.
So the role of the market and the role of the financial sectors towards the decarbonization is very crucial. Mm-hmm. And to be successful, first, we need to have the technological products, and believe me, we have them. But we need to have also the necessary tools and modifications in order to implement these new, let's say, technologies, new policies in the developing countries and also in the developed world. For the time being, we are not successful.
No, but we're tracking ahead.
We move towards this direction, but very slowly, and gradually everyone in the scientific world knows that this famous 1.5 degrees by 2050 is not anymore possible.
No.
I'm afraid that we are moving towards 2.5, if, as I said you before, we are not moving towards a shock.
Yeah. I wanted to use this opportunity to go a bit into the technical aspects of some of these cool materials. And also, I really think there's two aspects to how you've approached trying to mitigate. On the one hand, you can have the technological solutions, but on the other hand, there's also more the design solutions, where instead of the technology directly, you figure out how to create the urban space that helps. Maybe let's start with the cool materials, as you've mentioned it a few times. So how does this cool material work?
One of the main reasons that the temperature of cities is increasing is because we have a very high absorption of solar radiation by the city structure. We are using concrete, we are using dark colors, we are using asphalt, and all these materials absorb a very high part of solar radiation. This solar radiation, it is stored as heat, and then it is emitted and also transferred to the ambient environment and increases the temperature of our cities. Together with the anthropogenic heat, which is produced by cars, industry, etc., and also the lack of ventilation of our cities, the lack of green spaces, the lack of water, it increases the temperature of our cities. There are many cities that present an overheating close to 10 degrees compared, to the surrounding environment.
Yeah.
So this is the so-called urban heat island or local climatic change. How we can solve the problem? By reversing the phenomena that really increases the temperature. Number one priority, stop absorbing solar radiation. How this can be done? By having more reflecting materials.
Yep.
Materials that reflect solar radiation and do not absorb solar radiation. So this is the reason that centuries ago, in many parts of the world, settlements were designed and painted white.
Yep.
And this was very simple materials to avoid, let's say, absorption of heat.
I'm just thinking of Greece at the moment as well. I've got the image of Santorini in my mind.
But not only in Greece, in Spain, in Mexico, all these areas were really white. And this has contributed a lot. During our days, we have developed a new generation of materials that reflect. And we have also, materials of any color that reflect a lot. You may have a cool black, for example.
Okay.
You may have a material that is black. It absorbs, of course, in the visible radiation, but emits very highly in the infrared radiation. So in this case, you may have a black coating or a black paint, which is about, let's say, 15 to 20 degrees of lower temperature than a conventional black and looks exactly the same. And all these materials exist into the market and are used. And in some parts of the world, these materials are mandatory. For example, in California, these materials are mandatory. In the south of Europe, in some countries, these materials are mandatory for the public buildings. During the very last years, we have some new generation of materials which are revolutionary materials. The super cool materials are materials that present a very high reflections to solar radiation, more than 95%. But the main advantage is that all materials, as you know, emit radiation, infrared radiation. These materials emit the radiation in the so-called atmospheric window. What is the atmospheric window? In the atmosphere, the radiation which is coming from the Earth's surface is going to the upper part of the atmosphere, and at specific wavelength, this is absorbed by the atmosphere and is re-emitted back, except in a very specific wavelength zone, 8 to 13 micrometers, where the radiation may escape to the space. This is the cooling mechanism of Earth. And once this radiation, it escapes to the space, and the space is very cool, 1 degree or 2 degrees Kelvin. In this case, we have a net loss. And because of the anthropogenic activities, this window is really covered by CO2, methane, and the other greenhouse gases. And this is the reason that we have the greenhouse effect and increase the temperature. But still, it is open. So if really the materials that we have developed and we use in buildings present a very high reflection, but at the same time, the radiation which is emitted by the materials is at wavelengths that can escape to the space and do not go to the atmosphere and return back. In this case, you have a net loss. So these supercool materials have these specific characteristics. Very high reflection and very high emittance in the atmospheric window. So by using these materials, we may have subambient temperatures. As I mentioned before, we may have surface temperature of the materials 15 degrees below the ambient temperature. This, depending on the conditions, may decrease the ambient temperature during the peak period in a city up to 4 or 5 degrees. And combined with greenery and other, mitigation technologies, this may contribute tremendously, really, to improve comfort, decrease temperature, and decrease energy consumption. For example, the recent results of the study of mitigation in Riyadh in Saudi Arabia that we have performed shows that the use of supercool materials on the roof of the buildings contributes really to decrease the temperature up to 4.5 degrees during the peak period, but also in Riyadh, with such a high temperatures, decrease the energy consumption for cooling up to 25%, which is tremendous, and also decrease pollution and many other things. These materials actually are the object of additional research trying really to improve their quality and their characteristics in order to be useful also during the winter. Actually, we work on a project here in UNSW in Australia where we really want to have smart super cool materials that cool the ambient environment, having very high reflectance and very high emittance during the summer period. But on the other hand, there is an automatic modification and modulation of the optical parameters. And during the heating period, the cold period, these materials absorb heat, do not emit, so contribute to heating. So a very first implementation of these materials in Calcutta in India shown that the use of these second generation modulated supercool materials may decrease the ambient temperature up to 4 or 5 degrees, but increase the ambient temperature during the winter, if really we wish it, up to 2 degrees.
Pretty good. And it's a clever way of designing a technology to be applicable all year round, because sometimes you implement something for one season, but it's detrimental in another.
Exactly. So really we wish and we work on it. New research that is carried out now, trying really to develop supercool materials of lower reflectance. Is it possible? Yes, because having very high reflectance, these materials cannot be used on streets, 95%. You can't use it.
No, because it would
Can be
reflect
used
back
only,
on us
exactly.
as we're there. Yeah.
Creates problems of glare and contrast.
Yeah.
These materials can be used only on the upper roof, of buildings. But now we are developing color supercool materials with much lower reflectance, and we compensate the loss of the reflectance by using another cooling mechanism, which is called fluorescence. So the cooling, which is lost because of the less reflectance, it is compensated by fluorescent cooling of these materials. So now we have succeeded, and we have already developed green, red, any color of supercool materials that present sub-ambient temperatures, but without a high reflectance.
So you're able to stylize your urban environment with the colors of your choice. You're able to then still cool at the same time. And you also mentioned the complementary effect with green infrastructure, because in a way, that's where I come in on the cooling aspects, where you can then, in a way, pick the solutions for the correct parts of the city.
Exactly, because, the way that we integrate the mitigation technologies in a city is of very high importance. For example, we may have a big park,
Yes.
green park in a city. If around the park, for example, we have high traffic, the impact of the park into the ambient environment is almost negligible and is limited inside the limits of the park.
That is true. Yeah.
A recent study I performed was in Athens, in the National Garden in the center of Athens, which is a very interesting garden, I was walking there with a thermometer. Inside the park, temperature was 4 to 5 degrees lower than out of the park.
Yeah.
When I crossed the boundaries of the park, 5 meters,
Only 5 meters.
5 meters, temperature increased by 5 degrees.
Jeez.
Yeah, because of the traffic, anthropogenic heat,
Yeah.
So it's good to have parks for sure, but if we put fire around it, do not contribute.
Yeah.
So the best integration of the different mitigation technologies, green technologies, material technologies, blue technologies, water, very important, It's absolutely necessary really to have a successful implementation of mitigation technologies in our cities. It's not just to put some greenery here, some materials there, some water somewhere else. It is very important to have the proper integration. We learn a lot, we know how to do it, we have the tools to calculate how this can be done, and we have very successful implementations. We have more than 250 large-scale implementations, real implementations of mitigation technologies in cities, and we have, in average, without using supercool materials, decreased the peak temperature up to 2.5 degrees. So it is not something that will happen in the future. It happens today.
Yes.
And of course, there is a continuous progress, and we can do that, But almost all of these implementations happens in the developed countries.
Yeah.
We don't have important implementation in the developing countries. Why? Because this is not a priority for them.
Yeah.
And because the priority is completely different.
Mm-hmm.
And given this, you cannot really intervene and you cannot really help to do that. So we have, coming back to what I mentioned before, we have to work a lot on the necessary modifications to allow the implementation of this decarbonization, sustainable technologies in the third world.
And I guess that's also where bringing in multifunctional arguments can help create that integration as well. Maybe even build up the finances and resources needed to implement it for the good of the humans, for the good of the public health, and for the provision of other services or ecosystem services.
I think that the arguments are very well known.
Yeah.
And during the last 15, 20 years, the scientific community has worked a lot trying to document the benefits. The benefits and the arguments are on the table. Everyone knows the benefits.
Yeah.
The real problem, actually, is to, let's say, find the proper ways and the modifications to activate the market and the financial sector to adopt this new solution and try really to invest on this solution. This is the key.
Yeah.
The pathways through which really all these technological developments will be implemented in these countries. And the role of the market and the role of the financial sector is of extreme importance in these countries.
Definitely. And so you mentioned the planning. You've had a really just broad portfolio of topics that you've published on. You've published very prolifically and are highly cited. And in a way, you've achieved so much as well in the practical side with the implementation in a lot of these projects. It was over 200 projects. How do you get to this stage? I guess it's a lot of blood, sweat, and tears, and a very, very challenging journey.
Yeah, this is a very, very interesting discussion, because in order to have the opportunity to implement your ideas and your technology, in a real project or in a large-scale project, you have to convince the investors.
Yeah.
And then you have to be successful, because if you are not successful, no one will follow. I'll tell you a story.
Okay.
The very first mitigation project that happens in Europe was in Greece. We had developed at that time the cool materials. We have published the cool materials. Everyone accepted that the cool materials really may help to decrease the temperature of our cities, to cool our cities, but no one was interested really to invest in it and finance, a real project. After, a lot of effort, we convinced the prefecture of Athens to finance the implementation of these mitigation technologies in a small project in the coastal area of Athens, where we had to rehabilitate the whole park. We designed the whole project. As I mentioned before, we had really to find the industries that will invest on the cool materials. We've done it. And also we have to invest to convince the local municipalities and the local authorities that this is something of high interest for them. It was not easy. Although they, let's say, supported the implementation, they were not convinced that this will help. I remember that when really we implemented these new technologies in this park in Fleetsvos, in Paleon Phaleron in Athens, the mayor of the city, an excellent guy, he was always next to us saying that, okay, you're doing that, but I don't see any difference, Okay. When we finished, the day we finished, it was summer, It was a very nice day, and I told him that today we finish. And so what? What's the difference? What's the difference? I don't see the difference. So I told him, we went in a place, it was an intersection between the cool materials and the conventional materials. I told him, put your hand on the cool material and put your hand on the conventional material.
Yeah.
I said, why? Do it. He done it. He says, my God, It's a tremendous difference, 15 degrees of difference. Then he stayed there, everyone passing, he asked him, put your hands, put your hands, put your hands. After, 2 months, we have, some small feast, with the prime minister coming, to inaugurate the place. He asked the prime minister, put your hands, put your hands. The project was selected by the European Union for the environmental award, and he got the first environmental award of the European Union. He went to Brussels and he got the award. I remember that he's an excellent guy. I remember that it was an afternoon, see my phone ringing, and he was from Brussels, crying. Say, thank you so much.
Wow.
You've done a wonderful job. So much. I like it so much. Conclusion. Next year, we had 60 different projects.
Wow.
Because everyone wanted to do that. And while we started with one industrial company producing these materials, in a 3 years period, we had 15 companies producing these materials. So this is the implementation. You have really to insist. You have to convince the people. You have to be successful. Then it works. Yeah. The market follows. If the market understands that there are benefits, that it is win-win, if the financial sector understands that this is win-win, if the municipalities and the local authorities, they understand it, they will follow. But you have to be successful.
Yeah.
It is a fight.
It is a fight.
It is a fight.
And often a long journey from when you write that first publication to when you then use that to convince them to try it, from that moment when you have that simple act of placing your hands on 2 different materials and to have that one person amazed by it so that he attracts a lot more attention for others. I think that's a really fascinating story. So thanks for sharing that.
It is a very fast development, really, that the society follows, because there is a very strong demand from the global society to take initiatives and solve the problem.
Mm-hmm.
If they don't solve the problem, if really they don't apply mitigation technologies, if they don't decrease the temperature, there is a financial disaster for the cities. People, prefers to go to the big shopping malls, air-conditioned, and do whatever they have to do, than to go in the conventional markets downtown the city, especially during the summer. So this is really an anthropic death, as we say, of the cities. It is very important to intervene. But to do that, first, the local authorities, they have to understand the problem. Second, they have to find the proper solutions. Unfortunately, most of the local authorities, they are looking for very simple solutions, but simple solutions cannot solve complex problems.
Yeah.
For example, you cannot cure cancer by using traditional Chinese medicine. You need to use appropriate technologies, So, unfortunately, local authorities, they prefer simple solutions. Let's plant some trees. This will not help you.
No.
You need to have a more scientific approach. Empirical approaches may help up to a certain degree, but now we have science, and you need to have scientific approaches. This is the second obstacle, the understanding of the local authorities, and this is a very serious one. For example, in Australia, it is very difficult to convince the local authorities that they have to use scientific approaches and not very simplistic approaches. And then, once they ask you to implement something, you have to be successful.
There's a certain risk
Once
there.
you are successful and you have a very successful demonstration, then I think that the market follows immediately.
It's almost like a floodgate that opens with a lot of opportunities.
Exactly. But the role of the scientists and of the researchers and in general, the engineers is to convince, if possible. But the most important is to design it in a proper way.
Yeah.
If the project is not successful, they will not follow.
Yeah.
You kill it.
Serious backlash.
Exactly.
Fascinating. It's been a really fascinating conversation around a lot of your experiences and with some very, very interesting stories. I have some questions to finish off that I always ask my guests. And so looking forward to hearing what you have to say there. Beginning with probably the obvious one, you've mentioned a lot of those challenges that we have. But if you had a magic wand, if there's one thing you could change about our current situation, what would it be and why?
In my opinion, the major problem we are facing as humanity in general is poverty. In my opinion, this is number one problem. Eradication of poverty around the world is something extremely important. I have visited countries where poverty is really very serious. For example, Madagascar. I was shocked when I was in Madagascar. And I feel so sad and so sorry about what has happened. So eradication of poverty, in my opinion, is number one priority.
Because that also leads to all the other kinds of poverties. You mentioned the energy poverty. I guess there's also, from my aspects, the water poverty. So, no, definitely. Was there a key moment, book, paper, seminar, or event in your life that really changed the course of your career or your mindset?
I'm afraid it's not just one person. There are many persons really that have influenced my way of thinking.
That works too.
And my career, Many people, bright minds, that I met, that they had really an impact on me. People that they had very clear ideas, important developments and important, let's say, research, fair people with humanistic principles, people really that they live to create and they live in a very fair way. So I copy many things from them. On the other hand, many other people that I met that really was, let's say, the bad example. They helped me a lot to understand what I have to avoid. And unfortunately, this kind of example, exists in our academic society. So I understood that this is something that has not to be continued. This is something that I don't have really to follow. This is something that I don't like. It's out of my mentality. And, I have to navigate between good examples and bad examples. And each one of us, it absorbs here and there several things. And at the end, it creates, a character that has characteristics, of course, positives and negatives, and shapes, our life. It's stupid to say that, you are a good character or you are a perfect character. We are not really a complete character. We have a lot to learn. But the most important, in my opinion, that really we have to understand is that we are almost nothing in the context of this very rich world. Nothing. We are nothing. We are a small dot in the whole world with a very small contribution, with very limited knowledge. And really, with very limited contribution in reality. So I think that each one of us has to learn a lot, has always to learn, has always to absorb, has always to digest, and has always to create.
And we are constantly evolving. And I think, as you said just now, especially as an academic, you need to understand your objectives and your values.
Absolutely.
No, definitely. What was one of the most challenging situations that you have ever faced in your career to date, and how did you overcome it?
One of the most difficult decisions I have taken in my life was really to move from Europe to Australia.
Okay.
This was really a difficult decision. And this was a decision that has been taken together with my family, of course, given the context of the economic and social conditions in Greece at the time. Just to remind you that I moved in Australia in 2016, but the decision was taken in 2015.
Okay. Yeah.
Under very difficult conditions in Greece, where really most of my friends, they lost their fortunes, they lost their cars, they lost their houses, they lost everything. When really hundreds of kids, they collapsed every day in the schools because of the lack of food and the measures that were imposed to Greece by those really that they have imposed this situation. A very serious social really situation. I was very depressed at that time, very depressed and very sad and very aggressive against those really that they have created the situation. I used to work in Singapore at the time as a visiting professor, spending a lot of time, and I had a very good offer by the University of Singapore to go there. And suddenly I had two offers from Australia, from University of Sydney and UNSW. So I visited everything and I had to make a difficult decision. And finally I decided to come to UNSW in Australia for different reasons. And I think that was a very successful and good solution, proper solution. First, because, Australia is a very liberal country. It's a country that allows you really to walk, that supports you, that respects you, and they value your work. This is very important. And second, because it's a society that really, they don't put you into the margin. You feel that you are equal to the others from the very first day. And also, the university is a very liberal one, very open one, and very supporting to whatever we are doing. So I think that was a very successful decision. Although I moved in Australia at the age of 59 years old, it was not easy. This was really a difficult decision. It was not a decision that has not cost. It had a cost on me.
Yeah.
Leaving the country at the age of 18 years old, it's not a problem. You can be easily adapted. But leaving a country at the age of 60, it's very difficult. I have to tell you that, I miss Greece. I try to travel when it's possible. I miss my family there. But I'm very happy in Australia. And the very first years, this is my 7th year in Australia, I always worried where I feel better.
Yeah.
Do I feel better in Greece, in Europe, or in Australia? And this was a real question, that I have to ask myself. And it has taken a lot of time really to reply. So the answer was really clear. In Greece, I'm happy. In Australia, I'm calm.
Wow. It's a really nice conclusion that you reach. And in a way, I faced some of these decisions, nowhere near as challenging, I think, but I can certainly relate to a certain extent what it feels like to leave a place that you have made your home for many years and then to start almost like starting over again in a new one.
Yeah.
But thanks for sharing that. It was a really insightful experience into what goes into these kinds of decisions, but also just, I guess, the academic sphere where you tend to move around or you have to for opportunities as well. What tips and strategies can you offer in terms of time management? How do you maintain a balance between your professional and personal life?
I'm 66, 67 years old. Now I can balance my time.
Was it a learning curve? Or?
Yes. But you have to know that my work is my pleasure. It's my hobby. I'm happy to learn. I'm happy to work. I'm happy to be creative. I'm not so much interested to be productive. I'm not interested to have a supermarket lab. I'm interested to have a boutique lab.
A supermarket versus boutique. I like the image.
I'm interested to have a boutique lab doing serious work with serious researchers that really have an impact. So we concentrate on and we focus on very important issues. We don't try to maximize the financial benefits and the economic benefits. We are not looking for a lot of projects. We are not looking, for many papers. We are looking really for excellent papers, excellent research, and the highest possible impact. And this, of course, can be done because we have the experience. So I'm trying to balance my time really between these objectives and also my personal life. I think that it's a good balance for the time being, although I need more holidays, but this is another issue.
But you'll be traveling very soon, so
Yeah,
back to Greece as well. So that'll be nice. And I hope to also visit Greece at some point. So,
of course, you're very welcome.
well, thank you. So what advice can you offer to young researchers, young scientists starting out?
In the academic work, we have, let's say, some important biases, more and more, because of the high pressure that is exerted to the young scientists. People is trying to have big numbers, big metrics, etc. And they really forget the real objective and the real principles of research. This is, a mandatory path for an academic. This is the way, that we can demonstrate our work. This is the way that we can really show what we are doing. We have to follow this path. It's mandatory. We have to do it in a responsible way.
Mm-hmm.
And the main idea is to be, let's say, creative, not productive, creative, and have an impact. The objective of our academic career is not to have big metrics and big numbers.
Mm-hmm.
If you have big metrics and big numbers, this is fine, no problem. But this is not the objective.
No.
For sure. Unfortunately, more and more young people, they are looking for, let's say, big numbers, big metrics, and they're not so much interested about the real impact of their work. This is a big mistake. And I think that all of us, that we have the responsibility to educate young researchers, we have to play our, let's say, role. On the other hand, it is very important to publish. It is very important to demonstrate your work, but also you need really to translate this into real practice.
Sure.
This is the most difficult part.
Impact, not just impact factor.
Exactly, because if it is not translated, nothing will happen. In medical science, for example, you may find a new, let's say, chemical substance that perhaps may have a tremendous impact on something. If this is not really at the end a very specific pill that I have to take every morning,
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't help.
Yeah.
So this translation of research, if you are doing applied research, of course, into industrial products, tools and systems and products that are really used by the society, it is a shortage of real contribution.
Yeah.
This is very important. But this applies only to applied sciences.
Yes.
Someone who is working, on something very theoretical has not really the possibility to do it.
But it could help influence the applied sciences. And then that can go into implementation, I guess.
Absolutely. This is extremely important.
Yeah.
Yeah. And also, I'm sorry to say that for the second time, the result of our research should not really drive towards really the benefits of some big multinational companies and not for the benefit of the people.
Yeah.
I'll give you an example. The drugs for HIV.
Mm-hmm.
This is something that is developed by researchers and by the pharmaceutical companies. For different reasons that have to do with the income and the benefits of the big pharmaceutical companies, these drugs are not available around the world. So millions of people, especially in Africa, dies because of the non-availability of something that may save their lives. Why this happened? Because the license is not given, really, or because of different other reasons. And the technological developments that save the lives is not really transferred to these people. So we sacrifice people.
Yeah.
This is a serious problem. This is a miscommunication between science, research, and the market.
True. And it's a big challenge that we have to try and solve, not just in medicine, but also in our world to combat climate change and a lot of other aspects.
Absolutely.
And I think that point has come up very prominently in our show today as well.
So I think that as coordinators of research teams, first, we have to educate people to have the proper objectives. This is very important, extremely important, and the proper principles, moral principles. This is number one in my opinion. Second, we have to offer them the possibility to improve their knowledge in different ways. We have to be tolerant with them. We have to understand and respect their personal life. And we have to help them, and we have to understand and help them really to progress and, be more creative, not more producing. Our researchers, our young, collaborators should not be seen as robots, that they have to do something in the frame of a team, but they have to be seen, as members of a family that with specificities that really contributes towards the whole development with principles. This is the most important thing. I really believe that this is extremely important and interesting, and I'm very worried about the future of the academic society if really we try to maximize the benefits of the academics and not the benefits of the society.
Very, very sage advice. And I think it's important to vocalize this because, we're starting to see the stereotyping of academia, where it's all about publishing, all about the metrics, and less about society. Whereas I think there's a lot to give back to society as a result of that. Matt, this has been an incredible conversation, and we've gone so deep and also so broad in many aspects. And I hope listeners have taken away a lot of gems of wisdom from today's show. Where can people find you if they want to get in touch or know more about you?
Of course. Yeah, I'm very open. If someone is interested, it's very simple, to Google and find, information. I'm very open, really, to discuss on everything. And thank you so much for the opportunity you offer me. I enjoy this discussion. Excellent questions. And some of the questions were very difficult. I had to think about it. And you really given me the opportunity to express some of my deep feelings, and thank you really very much for this excellent discussion.
And I myself have certainly learned a lot as well, and really just gotten more clarity on the big picture as well for my own research. So I really do appreciate that. But as I do with every guest on the show, I usually leave them the last word. So Matt, one last message for the listeners to take away from today?
I'm trying to be optimistic. I'm an optimistic guy, and I'm trying to be optimistic, And although I know that the actual situation in the world do not really allow any optimism, I'm an optimist guy. And I wish to be an optimist, and I'm trying really to walk and be creative in order to offer more optimism to the world.
Thank you very much. And thank you to you, listeners, for tuning into this incredible and deep conversation with Mattheos Santamouris. For insights into his incredible worldwide projects on cooling cities, a rundown of major climatic consequences, or just travel tips to beautiful Greece, check out the show notes over at peterambach.com/podcast. If you enjoyed this show and are looking forward to more episodes, please do subscribe. Follow this podcast on Spotify, iHeartRadio, Apple Music, or wherever you are listening from to be notified of the latest release as soon as it becomes available. Leave a review or pass this on to your friends and family to spread the beautiful messages from our many great guests. If you're curious about me or my work in general, you can also check out my website or social media. Head to petermbach.com, my YouTube channel Peter Marcus Bach, that's Marcus with a C, or follow me on Twitter at Peter M. Bach or Instagram at petermbach87. Thank you very much for all your support so far. If you have feedback or suggestions or just know someone who has an inspiring story to offer, please feel free to reach out to me on social media. The podcast's intro and outro song is called Breaking Sweat by Balloon Planet. Stay tuned for our next episode and next guest to hear how they are tackling the grand challenges.